So if you've been with us for the last couple of months, we've been studying through the book of Daniel, and the first half of the book is historical, and so it's going through the life of where Daniel, as a young Jewish boy, being part of the ruling class, their country was invaded by the Assyrian nation, and many of the Israelites were carted off into Assyria. Then the Babylonians came in and finished off southern Judah, pulled all those guys out, and that's when Daniel and his friends and his family and his countrymen were carried off into the country of Babylon. And from becoming a slave, God blessed his faithfulness to still stay true to what God had set out for him to live, according to the ways of Judaism and faithfulness to God and all those different things. And it was not an easy road, but God blessed him and put him into a place of leadership. So we see how Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego made a stand in the nation and the empire of the Babylonians. And God got a lot of glory throughout all the trials and difficulties that this young man went through. Because he stayed faithful, the whole empire ended up hearing about the greatness of Daniel's God, the greatness of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So historically, the first 6 chapters are very challenging to us, very applicable, really. Even though you're looking at a different part of the world, thousands and thousands of years ago with a totally different culture, those same principles apply to us today as far as keeping your focus on God, staying faithful no matter what, and God will be glorified through that. The second half of the book of Daniel is prophetic. It has a number of different prophecies as Daniel was serving under Nebuchadnezzar, and then a couple leaders later, Belshazzar, and then the leader after him, Darius, leader after him, Cyrus. Daniel was under a lot of different world leaders, but Daniel was getting prophecies every so many years, and God was encouraging the nation of Israel, said, hey, I told you guys would get punished if you walked away from me, but it would be for a time period, and that time period is coming to a close. But I have everything under control. I'm going to bring you back home. I want to encourage you by giving you prophecies of the future. So this is a way for God to remind the children of Israel, I know what's going on. I know exactly where you're at, and I'm going to give you some very imaginative ways to communicate to you, I know what's going on. I know what's coming up. And you can trust me. And you also need to stay ready as well. So there's a lot of different lessons that we get from the prophecies. And a lot of times folks like to dig into these prophecies simply because they heavily emphasize end times. That when Jesus is coming back, world tribulation, the Antichrist, all these crazy things that are still in our future, those elements are brought to light through these prophecies. And so a lot of people really like to study the book of Daniel, but I'm going to tell you right now, it is not easy. There are a lot more questions than answers. And I believe God structures it that way on purpose. But we're going to jump into here. Today we're going to go through chapter 8 of Daniel, and this is another repetition of the prophecies that we've already studied. A lot of times God gives another prophecy in a different way to emphasize what he's already said. And looking at some of these details, you get a little different angle, a little more information. Then a couple chapters later, we're going to go through it all again from a different perspective with a little more information. So it's kind of a layered approach. But today, we just want to sit down and get the specifics so that next week, you're not going to be confused when we look at another prophecy. If you understand these details, you're going to be able to understand the next layer as well. So we're not going to get too deep into the weeds. We're going to stay as practical as possible, looking at the main information so that we're all together on this. So chapter 8, I'm in the book of Judges. That's not going to help. Let's open up to Daniel. There we go. Let's look at the first 2 verses and get the basic time frame and location of where Daniel is at with this particular prophecy. Daniel 8 verse 1 says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. So this is number 2. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. So right here, time given, this is Belshazzar's third year. And you remember, let's go through it. See, Nebuchadnezzar, and then his son, and then Belshazzar took over after that. So it could be, historically, they try to tie things together. Belshazzar may have been Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. It's possible. But there's a lot of history there that not everybody records everything, or we don't have a hold of all those records. But this is under Belshazzar's rule. Now, you remember, he was the guy that got the writing on the handwriting on the wall, that guy. He was only in control for a couple of years before he goofed up and got assassinated. That was part of that writing on the wall prophecy that we looked at a couple chapters ago. So that's the guy in control. And we see that Daniel moves back in the book of Daniel here to recording this in Hebrew. The other chapters, chapter 2 up through this point, were in Aramaic, which is the official language of the Babylonian Empire. But Daniel began his record in Daniel 1 with Hebrew, switches to Aramaic for a couple of chapters, and that first prophecy we looked at last week. But now here in chapter 8, he goes back to Hebrew. So people have theorized, well, why is he switching languages here? Personally, I think it's because God wanted certain people to get certain information and to have it emphasized. Some of these histories and some of these prophecies were specifically given to Nebuchadnezzar. God wanted this heathen king to know that God is in control, and only God's man can interpret these dreams and visions and prophecies. So Nebuchadnezzar, Mr. Head Honcho of the world empire, has to go to a Hebrew man to find out about the Hebrew God to know what his future is. It's a very specific way of getting a specific group of people's attention. But overall, this book is also given to the Hebrew people because they're in captivity and they need encouragement. So it begins with Hebrew, ends with Hebrew. This is one of those shifting points. So verse 2 gives us the location, and let me give you a little background here. It says that he's in Shushan the palace by the river Ulai. If you look at that part of the world, I think it kind of helps out to get a size comparison with something we're familiar with. So this area of the world, you're looking at about the size of Texas. Now, this is one of the things that Europeans don't get about America. Europeans, they can drive for an hour to 2 hours and literally be in another country, speaking a different language, need a passport, all that good stuff. We could drive for 3 days and still be in the United States of America. We got a lot of territory around here. So if you're looking from Israel in the west there, Daniel and his friends were taken out of the area of Judea around Jerusalem, carted all the way east into Babylon. And so you're looking at East Texas, okay, just with a size comparison going from one side to the other. Has anybody ever driven east to west or west to east across Texas? Takes a while, doesn't it? And it's really flat. That's all right. But it's even longer than having to drive through Kansas. That I've done, and that's as boring as all get out. But here's your size comparison. So Daniel is sitting on the east side there, if you see Babylon and that pink section, Elam. Again, we're dealing with thousands and thousands of years ago. Cities have changed, capitals have changed, cities have been knocked down and rebuilt. Some of the archaeology is not as up to date as we would like, but let's zoom in a little bit on that Babylonian Elamite area. We're getting closer in now to the northern edge of the Persian Gulf. This is the kingdom of Elam, and you'll see the Persian Empire is to the right. Where Babylon was, where Daniel was mainly working for most of his life, was up in that red box around the capital of Babylon. Now, where he's talking about, if you look at the word Elam, you go right above the E, is that town called Susa. That may have been Shushan. That's being referred to in Daniel chapter 8. Now, it depends on who you're studying, who you're listening to. So it may be, Persian side, we're looking at the Susa area. It may be, if we zoom in where that box is, it could be there, but it could also be more toward the west in the Babylonian region, because one of the rivers over there, modern-day river Karen, is possibly the river Ulai. So Shushan may have been a reference to the palace and not the city. So it's one of these two areas. That's one of the things about archaeology. They're always trying to catch up to the Bible. That's all right. But it is really fascinating to know that most of the places in the Bible, you can go there. It's still there. You can walk the same paths and tread the same streets that these folks did thousands and thousands of years ago. But we don't have all of it. Times and areas do change. So very well may be that I would kind of lean a little bit more toward this area over near Babylon, simply because the Ulai River, which may have been a man-made what do you call that? A man-made river section, an aqueduct. Well, not an aqueduct, that's above ground, but a man-made river. We'll just stick with that. That cut through a canal, that cut through the major palace city. That was in two sections. So whatever the situation is, Daniel is now by the Ulai River, near this area specifically, when God comes to him with this powerful vision. Now, this is the vision of the ram and the goat. And again, this is going to set a lot of the stage for some future prophecies. The main details that we have about the ram in verse 3 and the 4 are, "Then I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns." Okay, that's normal so far. "And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher came up last." So he's seeing these horns grow. Second one becomes a lot taller. Verse 4, "I saw the ram push westward, northward, and southward." That's very specific. "So that no beasts might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great." So that is a description of animal number one. All right? Nothing too strange yet. Now it gets a little weirder. Verse 5. "And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat, a male goat, came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes." So we got a floating goat. One horn, the thing's cruising and not touching the ground, and it's quick. All right? I'm sorry, I started researching goats this week, and man, goats are creepy. I do not like goats now. Sheep are cool, they got normal eyes, but goats have that rectangular pupil. Freaks me out. I'm like, my wife loves eating the things, but man, I want nothing to do with goats. They're just weird. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that they can grow horns depending on what area of the world you're getting the goat from. That's some weird stuff, but this is the Bible goat, and it floats, so we're just going to roll with it. So in verse 5, we see that this goat came from and originated from the west. Now, that is specific. All right, there we go. We got west. And it does not touch the ground, so it's talking about speed and no warning. I mean, something's just floating in and cruising real quick. This is very specific. And it had one main horn between its eyes. All right? So you got your ram doing its thing. Goat comes flying in. And verse 6 and 7, they get into a fight. Verse 6 says, "He came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler." That means anger, old English word. "Moved with anger against him, and smote the ram." Got a good solid connection. "And brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But the goat cast the ram down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand." So this goat coming in, round one, fight's over. Ram takes a bad hit, loses his horns, and the goat is the victor, stomps the daylights out of the ram. Nobody could rescue the thing. So there's your story. Animal fight, right? But it's all about the details. What is trying to be communicated by this? So let's now look at verse 8. What's the aftermath of this fight? Verse 8 says, "Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up four notable horns, four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven." Now, if you're thinking, well, goats don't have horns like that. Actually, some of them do. Again, some really creepy goats out there in the world. They have some really weird horn configurations. So what we're looking at are specific details about these goats. Now, I know that you do not have some of your blanks on the right side of your sheet. We're actually going to come back to that. So we're just going down the main information first. So if you go to page 26, we've already learned that the goat becomes great, and when it's in full strength, its horn breaks, four replace it, and these four are pointed toward the four winds of heaven. So it's a very even expanse. In verses 9 through 12 now, give a very specific detail about one of those four goat horns. Something weird happens. In verse 9 it says, "And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. It waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and practiced and prospered." There are a bunch of phrases in there which probably make no sense. If you've never read this passage before, this is really confusing. But if you're one of those people that is really familiar with Bible prophecy, a lot of these phrases are probably jumping out at you. So that's why we're trying to go through this passage very clearly, point by point. So some of the things that you need to note about this prophetical description: one horn produced a little horn. The little horn became great toward those directions, southeast and toward the pleasant land. Here's your next blank. And it became great and threw some of the host and the stars to the ground to stomp on them. So again, these are actions that all are symbolic of things that are going to happen. This little horn is going to get a lot of attention going forward in the next couple of chapters. It claimed superiority over the prince of the army, so there's some kind of conflict with another army. He removed the daily sacrifice and threw down the sanctuary. So you should be asking, well, what's a daily sacrifice, and what sanctuary are we talking about here? What army is he fighting? What prince? These are questions you need to be asking. It was also, this little horn was given an army against the daily sacrifice because of transgression. So obviously it's not talking about a real physical horn. It's symbolizing a specific person. And this person, this little horn, threw down the truth, practiced, and prospered. Now, I didn't know what the word practiced means, so I looked it up, and that actually means something very, very simple. It means you cause something to happen, that you are intentionally doing something to bring an effect. So whatever this individual is doing, he's got a game plan, a strategy, and he's successful at what he's doing. He's fighting against a prince and an army, and he's winning. So slowly you start to get an idea of like, okay, it's not just a real goat. We're talking about something it's symbolizing, and it's not just horns. These are talking about rulers or kingdoms. And then you start to work your way through this whole really, really weird story to see the different pieces and their meanings. Now, Daniel, again, is having a dream, and he's seeing these things happen. So when we get down to verse 13, we see a couple other characters come into play. Verse 13, then I heard one saint, or quite possibly an angel, speaking. And another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, well, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? So one angel says to the other angel, so when's all this stuff going to happen? Verse 14, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. All right. So there are symbolic pictures, there are animals, there are people, there are actions, there's a lot of fighting, and there's a time frame. But this stuff is going to happen eventually. What do all these specific things mean? Daniel was curious, more than curious. He was completely confused. So thankfully, God sends an angel in verse 15 to help Daniel out. So let's look at verse 15. It came to pass when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning. You got to remember, this guy's good at getting the meanings of visions because God always feeds him the answers, and he's been used to go to Nebuchadnezzar, go to Belshazzar, go to different people with answers. Now he's the one that's totally confused and needs somebody to come explain it to him. So God sends him an angel. And behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, so there's a voice out in the river, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall the vision be. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the last time appointed, the end shall be. So if you haven't picked up on that verse detail right there, Gabriel is the angel that is told to give the explanation to Daniel. So it's not too hard. You look up in the Bible, where does Gabriel pop up in the Bible? He's a very powerful, very special angel. It seems like he's the one that always gets to bring the big news to people. Because when John the Baptist was born, Gabriel was the one that talked to Zacharias, his father, and said, you're going to have a son that's going to usher in the Messiah. And then right down the road, months later, who shows up to tell Mary, you have been chosen by God to carry the Messiah? Gabriel. He's the one that always comes in with the big news, the big declarations of the massive events in Earth's history, humanity's history. Now, I find it fascinating. There isn't as much detail here. We just see Daniel's reaction to being in Gabriel's presence. The guy's scared out of his mind, and he drops on his face. But other points in Scripture where you see people coming in contact with either Gabriel or other angels, typically they're terrified. So when we see all these paintings from the Renaissance period of these chubby little babies with harps and wings and diapers on, that is not at all what a real angel looks like. I know people like to decorate with stuff like that. I knew a lady years ago in North Carolina. She just loved angels. She had them on her bathroom towels, everything. She just loved angels. But it's because she had this picture in her head. I don't think they make a bathroom towel with a real picture of Gabriel because people would be scared out of their minds. I mean, these angelic beings are terrifyingly powerful. They're in the presence of Almighty God. And God's got incredible imagination. So when it says this individual is like a man, you're getting a basic outline, but that's about where it stops because this dude's terrifying. Now we also saw that there's a voice coming from between the banks of the river, and that voice was probably the one that belonged to God, giving direction to Gabriel. All right, let Daniel know what's going on, Gabriel. That's why I sent you down there. So here we've got the basic setup of what this vision is. We got some really weird details with Gabriel showing up to help explain some things. And now I want you to go back to the top of that chart. So if you've ever learned how to read music, you know what that little squiggly S sign means, that you have to go back to a certain part in the music, and then you can pick up from there and continue on again. So let's go up to the meanings of these things. Back on top of page 25, the beginning of your sheet. I've warned you before and encouraged you that as you look at prophecies, all you need to do is jump on the internet and you will find a million different people who think they have every detail figured out about this stuff. Oh, I can tell you, I've studied and I've researched, and here's what this means. This last week, I was watching some of those guys. Some of them are kooky dook. They are out there, man. They got some weird theories. Some of them, they're almost believable just because the person sounds very convinced and exciting. But the only details that you can get hard and fast on are the ones God gives you. So in the rest of this chapter, we're going to pick up in verse 20. Gabriel is going to say, hey, this ram is this. The goat is this. And so we get some great specifics that we can be completely convinced about these details. Now, if anything is in italics underneath a point, those are possibilities. I just want to let you know that. They're very, very popular, I think well-reasoned explanations of these things, but even now, I'm not 100% convinced. These are definitely it. I'm only going to be 100% convinced if God actually explains it clearly in Scripture. So as we go back up, Gabriel is going to kind of start at square one and give an explanation. So in verse 20 it says, and this is Gabriel speaking, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. So we know from Daniel's life, and he's been under these men, there were two main kings of Media and Persia. Now, if you go back to some of the historical research that we've done together, you had the Assyrian Empire was huge. Then the Babylonian Empire got bigger and took them over. And then when they were enjoying their heyday off in the east, the Persian Empire was starting to get greater. There's also another kingdom off to their east, the kingdom of the Medes. So the Medes were kind of the jump on the bandwagon little empire. Whoever was winning, they would jump in with them and kick some butt. It was like, yeah, victory. And then as soon as they see another opportunity to beat up on somebody else, they'll jump in with them. That's what the Medes were doing with the Persians. Man, Persians are getting strong. Let's jump in with them. And then they start to conquer and win. Those two joined up and they beat the Babylonians. So as a way of saying, good job, Medes, we appreciate your help, Cyrus the Great, who is the king of the Persian Empire, looks to Darius, who is in the Medes, and says, tell you what, Darius, why don't you go be the ruler of Babylon for a while? You done good. So that's where Darius comes in, and Daniel's working under Darius. He does the whole Daniel in the lion's den situation under that guy. Darius sees the power of God, makes a big impact on him. But then after Darius's time was up, then Cyrus the Great steps in and he controls the whole shebang, the entire empire. So then Daniel is under the rule, or he works for Cyrus. So these are two of the main kings of Media and Persia. Darius was a Median descent, and Cyrus was the Great was of Persian descent. And of the two of those guys, Cyrus was definitely the greater leader. This guy gets a lot of screen time in the history books. Very, very good ruler. I'm not saying he's a good guy. I'm just saying he's good at his job. So that's very specific. That's very clear in verse 20. Verse 21 says, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. All right, so we definitely know where this guy is coming from, where this kingdom is based. So if you look on the map here I've got on the screen, this is basically what the Medo-Persian Empire controlled. This is a big tract of land, folks, because they took it over from the Babylonians, who took it over from the Assyrians, and the sucker keeps getting bigger. So bigger army comes in, they have a bigger hold on a lot more land. But what's going to happen, according to this prophecy, is that this ram of the Medo-Persian Empire is going to get taken over by a king of the Grecian Empire. Well, we have the benefit of just grabbing a history book and saying, so what happened after the Medo-Persian Empire lost its main strength? Who took over that guy? Well, we would have Alexander the Great. He was of Grecian descent. He was the first big-time ruler of the Grecian Empire, and they go in a series of 3 main battles over about 4 years of time. Alexander the Great takes over the Medo-Persian Empire with his Grecian Empire. This guy, there are still to this day history books written just about Alexander the Great. By the age 18, 19, he was leading his own army, literally. Tens of thousands of men. And the guy is absolutely brilliant when it comes to knowing when or when not to engage in a battle, who to pick on, how to move your forces. He's got excellent generals underneath him. By the age of 20, he's ruling the entire Grecian Empire because his father, Philip II, had died. Was assassinated, I believe. Age 20, got your own empire. I mean, how cool is it if you're age 20 and you have your own car nowadays? This guy has his own empire. He's driving whatever he wants to drive. So there's a very good possibility. And looking at history, I'm pretty convinced this is the horn that's being talked about, that the goat is representing, that his number one horn was Alexander the Great. And as you look at history and how he increased, he took that entire Medo-Persian Empire in only 4 years. So he was quick, he was powerful, he was intelligent. All of these little details that we read about back in verse 6 and 7, that he comes at the ram with anger and he stomps the daylights out of the ram. Nobody could possibly stop what he was doing. That's a pretty good description of Alexander the Great and his Grecian army. Nobody could touch him. They totally wiped out the Persians, outclassed them. I think of the main 3 battles that they were in. I think the last one, Alexander the Great was outmatched 10-1. 10-1 by the Persians. And because Alexander knew what he was doing, they snuck around the sides, used cavalry, routed the Persian army, wiped them out. It was incredible. 10-1 odds. I mean, that's insanity or brilliance. I don't know. Sometimes, depending on who writes the history books, colors it whatever way they want. But the guy was amazing. So the aftermath was that Alexander the Great, in verse 22, surprisingly dies at the age of 32. And what happens when he dies? Well, verse 22, the prophecy describes exactly what happened to the Grecian Empire. Verse 22 says, now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, and here's the explanation, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So we see that Alexander the Great did take over and then expand some of the empire of the Medo-Persians that they took over. And here's one of those creepy looking goats. Man, it's weird. That's a real goat, man. I'm like, with all the AI pictures out there, surely this is not real. It's real. There are really freaky goats like this. But what happened to the kingdom of the Grecians and Alexander the Great? His main 4 generals split the empire. Now, there were a couple of smaller generals that tried, but it broke down into these 4 main areas: Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. The 2 guys, the fellow in the south, Ptolemy, that took over Egypt and Palestine, and then the guy in the east, Seleucus, those are the 2 big dogs. As soon as these 4 generals got established, like, wow, we rule the world, this is cool, they started to pick on each other. So these 4 guys go at it, and whoever's weak, one of the stronger ones, would just snag up his land and get a little bit bigger. It's like, am I big enough to take on one of the other big dogs? So Seleucus jumps over and takes over the other 2 areas, and then it's just Ptolemy versus Seleucus. Those guys fight it out, and a lot of times they were battling over none other than the Judean area. There was something special that they wanted to control Palestine. Kind of makes sense. I mean, logistically, if you're going to get trades, you've got to set your trade routes through that area. But I think there's just something special about that part of the world. Everybody in the world wants to take over Israel. Why? They're tiny, but they're important because they're God's people. So there's a lot there that I don't understand. But could very well be that. I think you're right, Brother Joe. So that's what we're looking at. So we're getting a good history lesson here, and all those parallels that what we already see has happened throughout history, they match up beautifully. So this is the traditional view of what this prophecy means up to this point. But now when we get into verse 23, something very, very specific happens. This little horn that pops up off of one of the goat's 4 creepy horns, this gets a lot of emphasis. This individual, this Antichrist. People say like, oh, the Antichrist, the end times, ooh, creepy stuff. Yeah, it's some weird stuff, but you get a lot of detail from Daniel chapter 8, a couple chapters longer, and now all of a sudden you start reading the other parts of the Bible. 2 Thessalonians, you start to read through the Olivet Discourse that Jesus gave right before he died on the cross. Other passages mirror this. Different people, different times. All of these prophecies are all saying some of the same stuff. It's amazing. Verse 23, and in the latter time of their kingdom, these 4 kingdoms, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice. Again, he's got a scheme, a game plan, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy, which that word policy means cunning, also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. Craft is another word for deceit. So the guy is very cunning, he's a liar, and he's really good at what he's doing with his game plan. And he shall magnify himself in his heart, and this is one of the amazing details that's really got my attention, and by peace shall destroy many. That's a weird thing to say. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes. And in my Bible, that word prince is capitalized. Significance. But he shall be broken without hand. Man, there is a lot to go in. You can go deep and heavy in researching this section. So I'm just going to give you the basics because in a couple chapters to come, we're going to get more into detail about the Antichrist. But what we know, verse 23 through 25, the Antichrist, in the kingdom's prime, a fierce leader will emerge. He'll have extraordinary perception and a power source outside of himself. From other passages, we know that's because he's satanically empowered. He will successfully damage God's people. Now, across your sheet in the initial prophecy giving, it said that goat stomped down the host and the stars of the sky. If you look in other parts of Scripture, stars have been used to symbolize angels, which some people say, oh, this is an angelic thing. Well, there is a passage that does talk about that, but there are multiple passages that show that the Jewish people are symbolized by stars. You can go all the way back to Genesis 37, 9 through 10. As Joseph and his 11 other brothers are under their father, Joseph is having all these dreams that his father and his mother and the stars of heaven bow down to Joseph. His father recognized, wait a minute, your mom and I and your brothers are going to bow to you? Well, that ended up coming true in a couple decades. But the stars represented his brothers. There's also another passage in Revelation chapter 12 where God has given John this picture, this visual of all of history, where there's a struggle between God and Satan and the Jewish people, the bringing of the Messiah, Satan trying to stop them. That woman that is given in that passage symbolizes the Jewish people. She has 12 stars on her crown. So I really believe, based on what we're going to see in history and other details of coming passages, these stars refer to God's chosen people. And so you already have your definitions for policy. That's the word cunning. And the word craft, that is the word deceit. This Antichrist, this emerging leader, very intelligent, very sneaky, and he's an absolute liar. And the passage tells us he's going to be extremely arrogant. And again, that detail that's really got my attention, he will use peace to destroy many people. Folks, we have got so much strife and war and massive political problems in our world right now. Everybody's looking for someone to make peace. Peace in the Middle East, peace between Russia and Ukraine, peace with all these other areas. It would be very easy for a politician to stand up, to work some deals through lies and through very persuasive means. He's got a scheme going on, brokers a peace deal between nations, and the world says, wow, this guy's amazing, he's doing something good. But it's actually a massive game plan to gain control and to do evil things. It is really sad to have to be so skeptical and so cynical when looking out. When anybody does something good, you wonder why. Well, individuals like this make it really hard because he has intentions for the world. And through peace, he's actually going to build up the ability to damage God's people terribly. So whenever I see peace in the Middle East between the Jews and the different groups over there that want to harm them, I always kind of get that spidey sense, like, is this actually a good thing? I don't know, because there's always these schemes going on. But we see also in this passage that he will oppose the Prince of Princes and then be broken without human means. I can't wait to study some of those other passages and show you the means by which God is going to step in and crush everything this man has been building and able to do. So we'll deal more with that in chapter 11. But multiple times in these verses, it says that something is thrown down. He throws down the stars and stomps them. He throws down these kingdoms. It's kind of a generic term in Hebrew. You can use it in a lot of different ways, but it's actually not that hard to understand, because if you just imagine taking something and throwing it down, you kind of got the picture. It's one of those self-explanatory things. So this has to do with removing an object, a person, a kingdom, whatever you want to remove, destroying something, conquering something, controlling something. That's the idea. And this guy does a whole lot of all of those things. And the word practice means to act with effect or to cause something to happen. This guy is intentional. He's got a battle plan. Now, verse 13 and 14, toward the end of chapter 8 here verse 14 has one of them, verse 13 has one of them. As you start to see the phrases, transgression of desolation, you see phrases like the daily sacrifice being stopped, the abomination of desolation. You see numbers of days, 2,300 days. People are like, okay, those are big. What do those mean? And there are a lot of different theories. So I'm going to give you some of the main ones. So those are big phrases. So now that we're done with our chart, let's skip back down to page 27, to that portion that says balancing the timeline. Gabriel explained to Daniel that these prophetic details stretch all the way to the earth's final days. So Daniel's seeing things that are going on now, but he also has to understand this is covering a big chunk of time, Daniel. So as you try to study and you listen to other people's explanations, as you read, you have to understand that there are people that look at these prophecies certain ways. We're talking about humans that are studying, okay? There's a group that have a preterist view. Big fancy church term, right? Preterist just means past. These are the people that look at all these prophecies and say, oh, all of them are already fulfilled. Okay, everything has already been done in the past. That's the way they view all of these prophecies. There are people that have a futurist view. That's the opposite. They think all of these prophecies are going to happen in the future. None of it's happened yet. This is all end times, tribulation, antichrist, judgment of the world stuff. So what should we be? Because there's only two choices, right? Oh no, there's more. You've got the idealist view. You've got the historical view, that all this stuff is just historical things. The idealist is, well, it's all just spiritual and it's all just an illustration, but none of it's real. You've got so many different ways of looking at Bible prophecy. So that is why I'm encouraging all of us to just be very clear, very simple, and straightforward with our study. Only take for definite sure when God gives and assigns an explanation to a detail. And besides that, keep an open mind and keep studying. I'll listen to about anybody's view on Bible prophecy. I'm just going to take their view with a big old chunk of salt. Like, is that really true? I mean, I'll listen to you, but I'm going to think about it because I probably may not agree. I don't know. I'll give you a shot. What have you got? I am not 100% guaranteed set on a lot of these things, folks. It's because I want to be careful not to go in the wrong direction. There are some people that are so staunch on their view that they assign a definition and an explanation to every one of these details, and they are so convinced. And down the road, they have some really weird views on life and on church and on people and how to live. I want to avoid that. So I want to let God say what he means and not make stuff up as I go just because I so badly want to understand every little detail. So I believe that God repeats. And that's your next blank. I believe that God repeats these prophetical events. And repetition is a communication device that God uses for emphasis. We see that in other parts of Scripture as well. Verily, verily, I say unto thee. Jesus repeated the word verily, which means truly, multiple times. Like, I'm telling you something big. You better listen to this next statement. He uses repetition. And we see this multiple times. I believe we see it in Revelation. We see it in Daniel. Layer, layer, layer. Are you getting it yet? I want you to pay attention to this. I'm going to give it to you from a couple angles. Pay attention. So as I look at history, and I'm looking at Darius Cyrus, Alexander the Great. These guys really fit, it looks like, the historical side of all of these prophecies. But then there's going to be that little horn that pops up that stops the daily sacrifice, that does some kind of abomination of desolation, that the temple and the sanctuary of God gets taken over, that battles against the Jewish people. Is that something that has already happened that we can see clearly in history, or is that something that's going to happen that we need to pay attention for? I think yes and yes. So here's a bunch of, well, let me give you the next blank, then we'll get on to that. I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. So I believe some of these details have been fulfilled by people in the past and will be repeated again by others in the future. So the last end of the indignation, Gabriel tells Daniel, refers to the fierce circumstances composing earth's final judgment. If you've ever read the book of Revelation, you know that things get crazy on earth in the last times. I mean, they're studying this right now in Mike's Sunday school class. They just got done going through, was it Isaiah or Jeremiah? And now they're studying Revelation. They're hitting some pretty big, scary stuff. A lot of symbolism, but also a lot of realism in those books. It's the punishment that God pours out on sinful humanity is terrifying. So Gabriel is telling Daniel, this is going to happen in the future, but it is going to be the last end of the indignation. Indignation is not a light word. It is a passionate, fierce, angry dealing with something that's wrong. Being indignant, that would be a word that we could connect with. So indignation isn't past our understanding. So let's look at a couple of these phrases. Noted details. So everybody wants to know, what does it mean by the daily sacrifices stopped? Is this going to happen in the future, or is this something that's already happened? Well, if we look through history, you could look back at 586 BC when Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian empire rolled in and burned and destroyed the Jewish temple. That stopped the daily sacrifice because there's no temple anymore, and all the Jews got carted out. So there's nobody to sacrifice in a place that doesn't exist anymore. The daily sacrifice definitely stopped with the destruction of Solomon's temple, also known as the first temple. But that's not the only time. You go a couple hundred years down the road, 167 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes. This is a fellow that's going to come in with his empire, and he's going to destroy the second Jewish temple. Between Nebuchadnezzar and there, we know that Nehemiah went back and helped rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Well, a couple other guys, Zerubbabel and all them, they went back and rebuilt the temple, so they had a second temple. Fantastic. Well, then other people rolled in 167, and they burnt, well, forgive me, they didn't burn it. This guy said, no, I want to prove a point. He really hated Jewish people. He hated any other religion than his own Greek religion. He wanted to stamp them out. So he would burn Torahs whenever he would find them. He would force Jewish people to eat pork or be killed. He wanted to stamp out all other religions. So this guy marched into Jerusalem 167. He took a pig and sacrificed it on the Jewish altar, desecrating the altar. Then he put an altar to Zeus inside the temple. Absolutely blasphemous. This guy didn't care. He hated the Jewish people, hated God, thought he was the bomb, and that pretty much fits the description of this small horn Antichrist type guy. So this is a very well-liked explanation of this little horn. But if you think about it, yeah, you desecrated the temple and you stopped the daily sacrifice, but where does that put us in history if that happened way back in 167 BC? That doesn't make sense for right now. So that I don't think I can really swallow that theory. Well, what about the theory that the daily sacrifice stopped when Jesus, the Son of God and Messiah, died on the cross? The last sacrifice was given for man's sin. Nothing else needs to happen in the sight of God after Jesus died on the cross. So is this just physically the Jewish people were not able to sacrifice anymore? Or is this referring to God doesn't require a sacrifice anymore? So it really doesn't matter what the Jewish people do in the temple or not. That is becoming a more popular theory of looking at the daily sacrifice stopping, because the last sacrifice was given through the blood of Jesus Christ. Or go down the road another 40 years. The Roman general Titus, after the Jewish people revolted against the Romans, after Jesus had already risen from the dead, this is during the time of the apostles and the church growing. Roman general Titus surrounded the city of Jerusalem, eventually broke in. All the fighting went to temple grounds, and when he got in there, he absolutely obliterated the Jewish temple. I mean, if you remember back in Mark 13, verse 2, and the disciples were walking around with Jesus, and they're like, Jesus, look at the beautiful temple that we have, these stones, it's gorgeous. And Jesus stops them and says, guys, not a single one of these stones is going to be sitting on one of the others, not very long from now. Jesus prophesied the destruction of the Jewish temple in about 3-4 decades. So you're in the situation, the Jewish people, they have no temple. You can't do the Jewish daily sacrifice because you don't have any place to sacrifice. So that would definitely be a stop to the Jewish daily sacrifice. But then again, where would that put us right now in prophecy if all this stuff has already happened? Because that was near 2,000 years ago. And right now, there is no temple. Who controls the Temple Mount right now? I mean, the Jewish people police it, but the Dome of the Rock is sitting there. So in order to stop the daily sacrifice, nowadays, you'd have to have a temple rebuilt and for them to begin to sacrifice again. Well, you talk to a lot of Jewish folks over there in the Middle East right now, and they have plans to do just that. According to certain experts, they have all the things that they need to begin the Jewish daily sacrifices, the purification rituals, everything. They just don't have the Temple Mount yet. So it's kind of one of those goosebump on your arm kind of thing, what's about to happen? Folks, we got a lot point to some extraordinary times. So that's just the detail in this passage of stopping the daily sacrifice. There have been 3-4 different times in history where that's happened, and we're currently in one right now. So which is it? I think yes, 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 and yes. What about the abomination of desolation? Well, you can look back at a lot of these examples we just looked at, and not only was the daily sacrifice stopped, but horrible things happened when Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificed that pig and put the altar of Zeus in the temple. Absolute desecration. That's an abomination right there. The sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Messiah, that is an abomination of desolation. And I don't know how much worse you can get than that. Having the Dome of the Rock sit on the same location where the temple of God used to be, I consider that an abomination. But then we look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Go ahead and turn there for me. And we're going to be looking at this passage in much more detail in a couple of weeks. This gives a very specific detail about the abomination of desolation. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3 says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed." Talk about the Antichrist, the son of perdition. Verse 4, "Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4 kind of look like an abomination to desolation too. So if that's going to happen, because it hasn't yet happened, then that temple is going to get rebuilt. And some Antichrist is going to walk in there and claim it for his own, because he's obviously beaten the Jewish people to a pulp, which describes a lot of what this Antichrist is going to do. And we're going to see that more in detail as we go on and continue our study. So this is where talking about prophecy can get very, very confusing. And people will talk about details and run on rabbit trails and just like a dog chasing its own tail. They're just spinning and spinning and they think they have everything figured out. And the more I study it, the more questions I get. But I want all of us to be familiar with these main details, because God's going to teach us, and he wants us to pay attention to these things. This isn't to confuse us. I believe this is to do a couple very specific things. So here are your final blanks. We haven't even gone over the 2,300 days. And I'm not actually going to go over that, because all the explanations I've heard of how to figure out this number and what it means get wilder and wilder. I'm like, y'all have no clue, do you? Just say it. You don't know what you're talking about. But you're just coming up with something because you want an answer so bad. So I kind of threw all of those things out, but some of them are kind of entertaining. Verse 27, Daniel's response in our efforts. This is an amazing thing for a final verse of the chapter. Verse 27 in our Daniel chapter 8 passage says, "And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it." Even though Daniel had Gabriel show up and give him extra details, Daniel is still confused about all this. And so I think that's a really good point for us to stop and just do a self-check. If Daniel can't figure all this stuff out, do you really think that you and I are going to figure it all out? No. I don't. I'm sorry, I am not that brilliant of a guy. But what I do learn from this is I look at verses like Matthew 24:36, where Jesus is trying to prepare his disciples for the future. And he says in Matthew 24, verse 36, "But of that day and hour," speaking of when Jesus is going to return and all these events are going to unfold, "but of that day and hour knoweth no man." No, not the angels of God, the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So what's the point? Jesus is telling us all this stuff is going to happen, but you're not going to tell us when? Well, there's a reason. Verse 44 of that same passage. "Therefore, be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh." Folks, I believe that God is telling us all these prophetical details without a full explanation to help build our confidence, number one. God gives us enough detail to reassure us that he knows what's coming and he is in full control. Don't worry about it. He knows. He knows what's going to happen tomorrow. He knows what's going to happen in the week to come. And when all these things are going to drop, he knows he's in full control. I don't have to worry about it. So I don't live in fear. But here's what I do live. I live in diligence. We have just enough information to keep us watching and vigilant. Christian, that's how you live. Yes, study prophecy. It's some cool stuff. What it does is make you look around and say, all right, these details, do I see this happening in world events? What is going on over in this part of the world? What's forming up here? Your mind stays sharp and you're paying attention. And if you're doing that, this is why I believe that there are multiple times in history, whether it be 176 when Titus was going in, whether it be 586, whether it be AD 70, whatever these time periods, people are looking like, this could happen. This could happen now. We better get ready. We better soul win while we got an opportunity before all of this delusion hits people. We better do this before all the persecution hits. We better reach out for souls while we can, while we're still here, before Jesus comes and pulls us out. So you're confident that God knows what's going on, and you stay vigilant to be serving. That is an excellent lesson to get off of prophecy. With that, I can walk away and say, hey, I don't have all the details, and I'm okay with that. But I sure have enough that I know God knows what's going on, and I'm going to stay active because it could be going down really soon. Folks, I am 100% convinced of this fact, that Jesus is going to come back either by the end of my life or during my kids' lives. I'm convinced of that. I don't see how anything could keep going the way it's going right now and then all of a sudden slow down. I really believe Jesus is coming back soon, which means I better get myself in gear, do all that I can while I can. Because as difficult as our world is at times, we still have a ton of freedom and ability and resources right now in this country to get the gospel out in power. We better use it. So as we come back, chapter 9 is, I think, so underrated. Everybody loves to look at the first couple of verses of this chapter, and then they totally miss the massive blessing of the rest of the chapter. Because the first couple of verses get this detail. Everybody's got to know the detail. It's another one of those things. It's like, lots of theories, but the rest of the chapter, incredible. Oh, I'm excited to get into chapter 9, but we'll get there, Lord willing, next Wednesday. 8:29, right on time. Here we go. Let's pray. Father, there has been so much that we've gone over tonight and so much we haven't, but I pray that you've been glorified in what we have covered. This is what you've put in your word, and Lord, I'm confident everything in your word is there for a worthwhile reason. God, we need to see what that reason is and not get lost in other details that are not as pertinent for us. God, please open up our eyes to see the truth. But in doing so, Father, draw our hearts to the place of obedience that you want us to be doing, to trust you and to be active for you, knowing that the time is short. Father, we look at the early church. They thought you were going to come back immediately, and they lived with power and service and sacrifice and love. Well, that was 2,000 years ago. And looking at the times right now, I think you're right around the corner. Father, help me to be the passionate guy that I'm supposed to be, the servant, the soul winner, to be an example to the rest of my family and my church. Lord, may you be glorified that when you do come back, you find this servant and the rest of these servants faithful. Thank you for what you've taught us, Father. Encourage us to serve you this week. Give us more opportunities, Lord, whether it be a chainsaw purchase or somebody we park next to getting gas, somebody we run into at work or in our neighborhood. Father, help us to see those opportunities and speak your name. In Christ's name, amen.